Good evening, everyone. It's Gordon Causey, as always. And I see I have two people watching. I promised yesterday during my video, committed to doing one tonight around 11:30 on a very heavy topic. But before I get going, as if you've watched this channel before, you know, Candy is habituated to expect a treat at the start of every video. So lay down. Speak. Don't chuff. Speak. Good. Candy's taken care of. As always, live chat is on. Let me change it. There, I got the chat working. So if you want to put up a message, I love engagement. Yesterday was awesome. DM Andy is saying, nice dog. Candy the Wonder Pup. No, not a puppy anymore. 4. We should have named her Corona or COVID, as we arranged to get her in February of 2020, not knowing what was coming. And thank God we did, because the price for a border collie probably would have tripled versus what we paid. Anyway, talking about living in a godless world. I'm a Christian, bias stated right up front. I profess Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And as I mentioned in my last video, that's something I struggled with for a long time. I only consider myself as having gotten back on the Christian path, so to speak, around the age of 40 after some particularly challenging life experiences. And that's often the case. When I give my testimony, I'll often say that God, for faith to grow, you need fertile soil. And fertile soil, one way to fertilize is with manure, or to use a more popular term, shit. And well, there was around the age of 40, a lot of very challenging life experiences came in, and I found my way back to faith. A faith that I had abandoned late in my teenage years, around the age of 17, 18. But this is such a difficult topic to address because, firstly, what is God? Who or what? You have individuals like Bill Maher, George Carlin, who would use terms like the invisible man in the sky. And for what it's worth, I think George Carlin was an absolutely brilliant comedian. He was a wordsmith of the highest order. His insights, his ability to dissect popular culture and language were almost without equal. And I still remember a very famous one of his many routines. I mean, he had so many amazing routines, but one, he spoke specifically about how there's this invisible man in the sky who knows everything you do. He's all powerful, all knowing, all seeing, all wise, but he needs money. always seems to be down on cash. And Bill Maher, who was also a big fan of George Carlin and interviewed him many times, or at least a few times. He borrowed, I don't know whether he borrowed that term. I don't know if George Carlin invented it, but DM Andy saying there may be something in that. I haven't thankfully really been challenged yet, and I'm in my 50s. I'm in my 50s as well. I was born in 1966, 57 years of age. And, again, this invisible man in the sky. How do we conceptualize God is a question. And when I look at scripture, I've got one of my Bibles here. This is the New Oxford Annotated Bible with the Apocrypha. It's a Bible I got in university when I was taking biblical courses. My education centered on the humanities and political science. And this was for Greek and biblical traditions, I remember the name of the course. And one of my favorite passages to go back to is Moses' encounter with God at the burning bush, as recorded in Genesis. Moses had fled Egypt and was in Midian tending to Jethro's flocks, his father-in-law. And he was going about his normal routine, herding the flocks. And Jordan Peterson introduced an interesting metaphorical way to approach this, in that he described it as Moses was basically doing his normal routine when off to the side he saw an amazing sight. He saw a bush that was on fire and yet was not consumed. We all know what happens when you burn a piece of wood. The fire consumes the wood and renders it into ashes. Well, what Moses saw was a bush that was on fire, yet the bush wasn't being consumed by the flames. And so Moses deviated from his normal routine. He walked away from the path he was on, and he went toward this presence, this burning bush. And the metaphorical analogy to which Jordan Peterson applies to it, and maybe others, may not be an original Jordan Peterson, probably not, is that's kind of a representation of how we all lead our lives. We're in our normal routine, and then a higher power pulls us aside, draws our attention away. And do we deviate from just our normal head down, go about our daily business, and, well, I'm just going to ignore that? Well, Moses didn't. He went and he stood in front of the burning bush. And at that point, he was given charge to go to Egypt to free the God's chosen people, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to set them free. And Moses is full of doubt. It's a great metaphorical. How many times have we felt that? I think it's a common human experience for people to feel called to do something, but then to have doubts, have questions. I'm not good enough. Well, what if I fail? I'm going to look up the passage. I should have gotten this ready beforehand, but I didn't. So that's Isaac, Rebecca, Jacob, birth of Jacob's sons. Jacob wrestles with the angel. The seduction of Dinah. Tamar bears twins to Judah. Joseph. Actually, yeah, I'm misquoting. It's not in the story of Moses is actually in Exodus. I'm horrible. I should know that. Moses and the bulrushes, the burning bush. Here we go. So it's actually in Exodus. My apologies. So I'm just looking through. Now, Moses was keeping the flock. So what has happened is, just to give you some background, Moses was in Egypt. They're people of Israel, the Israelites, the Hebrews, the people of the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, had settled in the land of Goshen in Egypt and had grown numerous, hundreds of thousands, over about a 400-year period, and had been enslaved. The Egyptian pharaoh was concerned that they were a great people and they could join with the enemies of Egypt and possibly overthrow the kingdom. And so there were pogroms that were brought in where all the male children were to be drowned in the Nile. And Moses was born in this setting, and his mother had hid him from the Egyptians, And then when he was around, I think 3 months old, 6 months old, put him into a cradle made of bulrushes lined with bitumen, lined with tar, and sent it down the Nile. And then it had been found by a daughter of Pharaoh. And eventually Moses was raised as an Egyptian. When you watch the Cecil B. DeMille classic film, The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston, they play fast and loose with a number of things. One of the things that happens is Moses knows he's a Hebrew. In the movie, they depict it as if he suddenly discovers it. He discovers the cloth that he was wrapped in, and it's a Hebrew cloth. And there's this sudden epiphany. He realizes he's Hebrew. But the biblical account, Moses grows up knowing he's a Hebrew. And what happens is he captures an Egyptian abusing a Hebrew slave and kills the Egyptian, looks around, sees that no one's watching, and kills the Egyptian. And then later, he comes across two Hebrews fighting with each other, and he says to them, "You're brothers, why are you fighting?" And the one who was the aggressor in this fight between the two Hebrews said, who made you boss over us? Are you going to kill me like you killed that Egyptian?" And then Moses realized that, okay, my crime is known. People know that I killed the Egyptian. I could be in trouble. And at that point, he fled and ended up in the land of Midian. And he came across the daughters of a man named Jethro, who was the priest of Midian. And there are suggestions that he is an Ishmaelite, meaning of the descendants of Ishmael. Sorry for digressing and giving so much side story. I mean, this is such a difficult and weighty topic. It's hard to avoid. So anyway, he's tending to these flocks when the incident I spoke about, when he comes across the burning bush. So I'm going to read, starts in chapter 3 of Exodus. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and lo, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, "I will turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt." And that's where I say Jordan Peterson uses this as a metaphor that we can apply, that anyone can apply to their own lives, where we feel a calling, a pull. We're given a sense, call it your conscience, leading you to go another way. And Moses does. He does leave the path. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, "Moses, Moses." And Moses said, "Here I am." Then God said, "Do not come near. Put off your shoes from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." And goes on to say, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, "I have seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cries because of their taskmasters. And I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites. The Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring forth my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt?" And God said, "But I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought forth the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God upon this mountain." Then Moses said to God, If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? This I find incredibly significant because, and I referenced it in my last video, what Moses saying to God, if I come to the people of Israel, Israel is the name that was given to Jacob. It was Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob wrestled with an angel all night and refused to submit and would not release the angel until he was given a blessing. And the blessing that he received is that his name was that he was given, Jacob was given, was Israel. Then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? Why is Moses asking for a name? The Egyptians had gods. They had Ra, the sun god. They had Osiris, god of the dead, of the underworld. They had Nubis, who was a jackal-shaped god. So you have all these gods, and they all had specific jobs, specific roles to play, similar to the Greek or the Roman pantheon of gods. And so putting a name on something helps to define it, helps to set parameters, helps to put limitations on it. And the response he gets is God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. And God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt, and I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt. I won't go on. The word of the Lord, thanks be to God. And putting a name, defining God. Jews, Israelites, if you like, Hebrews, in Judaism, it is common. They use the term Hashem, which simply means that's Hebrew for the name, because there's the commandment that thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. And so that means in Christian usage, we tend to think of it, we won't use the name God or Jesus Christ as a pejorative. I often remark that the most holy or the most reverent place I ever go is the golf course, because every time a guy hits a bad shot, people say the name of my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And whereas for Jews, they believe that taking the name of the Lord in vain is mean calling on his name outside of an incredibly reverent process. And so they simply say Hashem, the name. I'm going to read what Valiant Thor has written. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20. I won't check chapter and verse. I've read that before. I have read the entire Bible. But how do we put a definition on God? How do we put God into a box? There's another familiar little saying that goes around that God created man, and man, being a polite being, returned the favor. Meaning we created God. And I need to go back to a video I did a while ago, and I probably have done this 2 or 3 times, talking about how the more modern concept of creation is viewed. And this Big Bang theory holds that all the sum total of energy and matter in the universe today, that at one point, billions of years ago, that it was all comprised, all compressed, and all contained within one tiny little speck that is referred to in scientific circles as the singularity. Little tiny speck, invisible to the naked eye, no bigger than a quark. And then there was this Big Bang, and matter just started floating around chaotically, blah, blah, blah. And then out of this chaos, out of this total disorder, that eventually somehow order came into being, galaxies, planets, solar systems, out of chaos came order. And then further, that some spontaneous generation, somehow life came into being, single-celled little microbe type organisms. And then this process, what Darwin's theory of evolution and the origin of species, that things just started getting more and more organized. And now, we're kind of the apex, the pinnacle of this evolutionary process, the human brain, and that it was all just random chance, luck, that we're, a random mutation or two. Human beings are a random mutation or two from not even existing. And I think there are serious ramifications for a society that embraces that kind of ideology, where everything's just random, everything's just chance. There's no meaning, no purpose, no truth behind anything. It's just chaos, and it's just luck that brought everything that we know into being. And that's not a view to which I ascribe. I don't like to straw man it. I don't like to try and make it appear ridiculous. I prefer to use what is called the steel man argument. I'd rather confront the point of view with which I disagree by painting it in the strongest possible terms. It's hard for me to do because I don't agree with it. I do not view creation as having been a random chance. There's something in the laws of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics deals with something called entropy, and that which states that the natural order of things is for highly ordered systems to decay and to devolve. Evolution runs counter to the laws of thermodynamics. Thermodynamics says that things do decay, that you go from high states of order into disorder, not the other way around. However, if we accept this notion that everything is just random, everything is just chance, well, then there's logic to the way the world is going. Valiant Thor has written that this is happening today, that we are calling evil good and good evil, and that we're putting darkness ahead of light and light ahead of dark. We're replacing light with darkness, and we're replacing bitter with sweet and sweet with bitter. The world's turned upside down. When we look at the whole transgender situation, we can't even agree, and we can't even put a definition on something as simple. I was talking about how Moses wanted to put God into a box by asking him, "What is your name?" Naming is something that we do to help define the world that we live in. We place names on things, they describe them, they define them, they set parameters on them. We now, in our world, we can't even do that for women. So what is a woman? I forget the guy's name who put out that video. What is a woman? We can't even decide. A woman is now become a subjective thing. It's based on feelings. It's based on a person's own subjective beliefs. So what one person believes a woman is, another person can believe differently. And It's fine to have differences of belief on an individual level, but how does a society function when you can't even delineate something as simple as what's the difference between a man and a woman? And this is why I say in the title to this video, what you know, what a godless world looks like. We're finding out now what it's like to live in a godless world, because in a godless world, there's no truth. Everything's just random. There's this, when you live, you die, and then you become fertilizer for the soil. You become the meat for worms. Consciousness ends. So to the maximum degree possible, one should simply seek to sate their every desire in the here and now, and then and just be, because when it's all said and done, there's nothing. Again, consciousness ends when our earthly body dies. That's the end. Not my belief, but and so confronting this world where a guy can suddenly say, well, because I feel like a woman. I mean, there was an instant not too long ago, within the last few, I think it was in the last month or two, when a Canadian man in his 50s decided that he identified as a teenage girl and entered a swimming competition for teenagers and used their changing facilities, and then went into the pool and throttled them, in the competition, and I guess won a gold medal or something. And that is insane. And what's interesting is there are a lot of people who profess themselves to be atheists who, regardless of their atheism, they recognize the insanity of a 50-year-old man competing against teenage girls and sharing their changing facilities. They recognize the insanity of it, and they'll say, it's immoral. But morality, where does the concept of morality come from? The concept of morality is born out of the fact that we are the creation, we are not the creator. And if there is no creator, if there is no God, if there is no power beyond this world, then what's the point in having any morality anyway? Just do what you feel. Live a hedonistic lifestyle. Be a narcissist on steroids. Seek to satisfy your every want, whim, desire, because there's no consequence at the end of the day. And there's an interesting C.S. Lewis, who wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and the Chronicles of Narnia. He, after I think World War I, was what caused him to convert and become a Christian. And he wrote many great books on Christianity, one of which I've read. It's called Mere Christianity, seeking to boil Christianity down to its most basic and fundamental principles. And there's an echo of what C.S. Lewis, his arguments are echoed somewhat in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. There's the character of Lucy. Lucy has gone into Narnia and has come back, and she's told her Susan and Peter and Edmund, her siblings, about Narnia and everything. And of course, they don't believe her. I mean, who goes into a magical world through a wardrobe door? It's obviously insane. But then Edmund, who's a mischievous, mean-spirited, spiteful little boy, he also gets into Narnia and meets Lucy there. So the two of them have now been in Narnia, and Lucy's thrilled because now she has someone to back up and substantiate her story. And when they get back into our world, when they leave Narnia and come back in through the wardrobe, Edmund and Lucy are confronted by the two older siblings, Peter and Susan. And Lucy is, super excited. Great news. Edmund made it in too. Now, he can back me up. He can tell you that this is real. And then Edmund, on the spot, decides to be very spiteful, and he goes, well, I pretended with her. She's just a little kid. Edmund's a little bit older than Lucy. I played along with her in her little game, and that causes Lucy to pull away, become very depressed. She runs away crying, and days go by, and she cannot be consoled. And the two older siblings, Peter and Susan, are concerned about her. And so they go to the old professor who owns the house that they're staying in. And the old professor is sitting there, and they tell him the story. And, they're concerned with what is wrong with Lucy. And the professor, he said, well, of the two siblings, between Edmund and Lucy, who is the more honest? And they say, well, Lucy, all day long. She's always been the more honest. Edmund is spiteful and mean, and he's always been known to lie. Okay, he said, and is your sister crazy? And they say, no, she's not crazy at all. She's perfectly sound mind. And the professor leads them to believe, well, then what she is saying, if you think logically, is true. You say that between Edmund and Lucy, that Lucy is the one who is always honest and Edmund is the one who is always lying. So on that measure, you should believe her. And you say she's not crazy. I mean, there's only three possibilities. Number one, she's lying, which you say she's very truthful. Number two, she's crazy, but you say she's not. So the only logical conclusion one can draw is that she is telling the truth. That's the argument that C.S. Lewis put forward for believing in Jesus Christ as the Christ, as the Word made flesh. And he said, basically, Christ came claiming to be the Son of God, the Christ, God in the flesh. And there are only three possibilities. A, he was crazy. B, he was lying. Or C, he was telling the truth. Did Jesus amass great personal wealth from his proclamation that he was the way, the truth, and the life? No. Was he elevated did he become a royal type person with all the trappings that come with being a royal? No, he was nailed to a cross for his proclamation, and his proclamation changed the world. We now mark time by Jesus coming into the world. They estimate that year zero. That was their reckoning. That was why we refer to, we're in the year 2024, and that's AD, which means Anno Domini, which is Latin for year of our Lord. And if you go back to 500 BC, that's before Christ. It's become popular in academic circles now to use the terms Common Era and before the Common Era. So BCE, before the Common Era, CE, Common Era. I have a bit of a problem with it. I would use the term, if you want to change it from Anno Domini, the year of our Lord, I would say when I see someone or hear someone using the term CE, Common Era, I think Christian era. Doesn't mean you have to acknowledge Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, but we are living in the Christian era. That was the point, Jesus's birth. They actually now, biblical scholars and historians reckon that Jesus was born maybe sometime around 3 or 4 BC. They didn't have birth certificates back then. They didn't have computerized records and such. And if anything was written down, it was written down typically on papyrus or vellum. And you get the point, I hope. Anyway, there was a C.S. Lewis, in bringing him up, He also had an interesting argument with in terms of trying to present God, and that is he made the point of Shakespeare's play Hamlet, but thinking of it more in terms of it being a novel, the story of Hamlet. To be or not to be, that is the question, whether it is nobler in the mind and all that other stuff. God to us is like Shakespeare to Hamlet. Hamlet has no idea who Shakespeare is. Hamlet is a creation of Shakespeare. The only way that Hamlet could encounter Shakespeare is if Shakespeare had decided to inject himself into the narrative, into the story, into the logos, to use a Greek word. Absent that, I heard this framed in the context of the first Russian cosmonaut who went into space. The old Soviet Union, of course, was classic Marxist. Religion is the opiate of the masses, and the state religion was atheism, no religion, atheism, no God. And the cosmonaut went up, first man into space, and having been up amongst the stars, he was happy to report that his atheistic worldview had been confirmed because he'd gone up into space, into the heavens, and had not seen God, ergo God does not exist. And again, this is where this analogy of C.S. Lewis comes in about Shakespeare and Hamlet. How could Hamlet know God? Just by going up? You'd have to jump out of the pages. And God is creator of the heavens and the earth. So we're finding out what it's like to live in a godless world in terms of transgenderism, in terms of everything. We look at this conflict that's going on between Israel and the Palestinians, or what are called the Palestinians. I've said many times I have a problem with that term, Palestinian. The term Palestine, people talk about free Palestine. Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. And it's like, well, what is Palestine? Define it. What is it? And people believe that Palestine is simply Israel, that Israel used to be Palestine. And to a point, that's true. It used to be called the British Mandate for Palestine, but so did Jordan. Jordan was also part of the British Mandate for Palestine. So everyone who lives in Jordan, what is Jordan now, and everyone who lives in Israel today, occupy territory that used to be under the British Mandate for Palestine. So define your terms, and something I used to hear in university all the time. Students have a tendency to assume that a term they're using that is well understood, but often terms, one person sees it one way, another person sees it another, so you need to explain what it means to you. When I talk about God in a godless world that we live in, because we're unable to escape the pages of the book that we're in, we think that the writer of the book doesn't exist. John starts his gospel with, it's the most poetic of the gospels. The first three gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are called the synoptic gospels, and they tend to be very chronological, whereas John's gospel is far more poetic, and that starts right at the beginning. I can quote it off the top of my head. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now I'll look and I'll read it and see how close I am. So, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, he being Jesus Christ. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Again, the word of the Lord, thanks be to God. DM Andy is saying Jordan was Transjordan, and that's absolutely correct. Jordan was created out of the British Mandate in 1921. The Mandate for Palestine was established in 1920 at the San Remo Conference in Italy, kind of a breakout session of the peace talks that were going on in Paris after World War I ended. And when it came to dealing with the former Ottoman territories, they had this breakout conference in San Remo. And in 1920, they established the British Mandate of Palestine. And again, it included all of what is Israel today, as well as all of Jordan. And there was a group called I'm being asked by the Arctic Bunker if I have ever read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. No, I have not. Looks like I'm going to have to take a trip I've heard of it before. And I'm not even sure of Marcus Aurelius. I know he's, I believe, a Roman emperor, if I'm not mistaken. DM now is saying I'm going all over. And at San Remo, the eastern boundary of Mandate for Palestine was the Jordan River. But this is a more minor quibble. Sorry, don't worry about it, Andy. I enjoy engagement. The eastern, I mean, it's hard to define, because in 1921, what happened was, so they had the mandate, includes all of present-day Jordan, all of present-day Israel. And then in 1921, what had happened was, during World War I, the rulers of Saudi Arabia was something called the Hashemite dynasty. They ruled the Arabian Peninsula. They were the sultans of Arabia, if you will, reference Peter O'Toole's famous movie, Lawrence of Arabia. And so what happened is that it was the Hashemites who had allied themselves with Great Britain and had fought with Great Britain against the Ottoman Turks. However, after World War I ended, something of a civil war broke out between what is called the House of Saud and the Hashemites. And at the end of it, it was the House of Saud that won. And so Arabia became Saudi Arabia, and the Hashemites were deposed. So this dynasty that had supported Great Britain in the First World War was a people without a country. They were from the Arabian Peninsula. So Winston Churchill said, it's okay, we'll carve you out a section of our British Mandate. And the part they carved out was east of the Jordan River, and kind of abutted on the Arabian Peninsula. And so the Hashemites were taken care of. They were given a part of Palestine. Now, 1921, when it was created, this new emirate state was a protectorate of Great Britain. However, they denied citizenship to Jews. Jews were denied citizenship in Transjordan. And while Transjordan, being an emirate state, it's a kingdom, so there's no voting rights, but you get your passport, your government documents, things of that nature, and Jews were excluded from that. So the Jews returned to what remained of the Palestinian Mandate, the 25% or so of the original mandate that was left. They returned there. The British had committed to creating a Jewish nation state. So they're like, okay, we'll move and we'll go to the Jewish portion. And it makes sense, because I looked at the population numbers. There were between 700,000 and 800,000 people in Palestine, Jordan, and Israel in 1920. There was in and around 700,000, 800,000 Palestinians, Palestinian Jews, Palestinian Muslims, Palestinian Druze, Palestinian Christians. They're all living in Palestine. And so they created this Hashemite kingdom that was given the name Transjordan. And the Jews left. They were denied citizenship. So they went to the remaining 25%, which Britain had said, we're going to create a Jewish nation state there. Okay, you can have that. We'll take this. They had gotten 75% of the mandate, but that makes sense because the population was roughly 75% Muslim. So they got 75% of the territory, all well and good. The only thing is, then when Britain tried to create a Jewish nation state, the Arabs said, well, we want the rest of it too. We don't want the Jews to get anything. And Jews have been living in that area continuously going back millennia. The population did get down to probably less than 10,000 at some points, went up and down and up and down. But in the late 1800s, Jews started moving in number, in large numbers, started moving into the Levant. And so by the 1920s, 30s, 40s, there are generations of Jews who have been born in that region. And so finally, 1948, I mean, people talk and they say, well, Britain handed Israel a country. They stole it from the Palestinians and they just gave it to them on a silver platter. No, that never happened. That did happen with Jordan. They did hand 75% of the British mandate over on a silver platter to this Hashemite dynasty and said, here, have a country. And the Jews said, fair enough, you can have that. We'll go have our the little sliver that remains. But the Arabs said, no, we want all of that too. And the Brits said, okay, well, you know what we'll do? We'll give you some of it. We gave you the 75%, and then what's left, we'll give you part of that too. And the Arabs said, no, all. We get all of it. And Britain kept saying no. And so that went on for a long time. Then 1947, Britain basically washed their hands of it, a little bit of Pontius Pilate. And they said, we're done. We're finished. They put an expiry date on their mandate, said our mandate is going to expire on May 15th, 1948. They handed it over to the UN, the newly created United Nations, and they said, here, you deal with this. We can't. And the United Nations made a proposal for a partition to, again, create a second Palestinian state to go along with Transjordan, and for a Jewish state. And the Arabs kept saying no. They said, no, we want all of it. And so they had a partition plan, but it was never enacted because the Arabs wouldn't agree. And so on May 14th, 1948, the Jewish leadership under and I can't pronounce his name, Gurion, I think is the closest I can come, the first prime minister of Israel, his government, for lack of a better word, made a unilateral declaration of independence on May 14th, the day before the mandate expired. And they said, we're an independent country. And immediately the following day, 5 nations of the Arab League invaded: Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon, and I missed one, and Saudi Arabia. They all sent forces, invaded, and 5 against 1, 30 million people against less than 1 million. Those are the populations, the Jewish population in Israel. It didn't even claim all the land of Palestine. What they did is they claimed they set their boundaries when they made the Declaration of Independence based on the UN partition plan that had been proposed but never acted on. But the war came along, and when the war ended in March of 1949, Israel signed armistice peace agreements with the invading nations. It was at that point that the Jordanians, because they changed the name from Transjordan to Jordan in 1946, when they stopped being a protectorate, when they gained their full independence from Great Britain. So the Jordanians had managed to capture a large part of the west bank of the Jordan River. We call it the West Bank to this day. So that was never part of the Palestinian state of Transjordan or Jordan. But during that war, during the first Arab-Israeli war, the Jordanians captured the West Bank. And so when the peace agreements were signed, it was part of the Green Line. So Israeli territory went up the Jordan River, and then there's a chunk, the West Bank, that was Jordanian territory. And all would have been well and good if peace had been maintained. But in 1967, the Six-Day War, Jordan, along with Egypt and Syria, they went to war with Israel again. And it was at that point, that's when the Jordanians lost the West Bank. But I've gone way off. The Arctic Bunker is saying it's unfortunate fortunate. Most atheists, agnostics, and people in general have not read it. Are you talking about this Marcus Aurelius or the Bible? Have not read. The Bible is an incredible book, even if you want to forget about looking at it through a theistic, godly lens. It just speaks to the nature of reality. I want to get back on track, and I don't want to go on too much longer, but one can realize that, okay, there must be a God, there must be a higher power, that this idea that things just came about randomly by accident, chance, that's intellectually difficult to wrap your head around because it contravenes the laws of thermodynamics. There is this theory put forward. I've spoken about it before, and someone on here corrected me on my pronunciation. It's abiogenesis, or I used to say abio. I used to say abiogenesis. It's abiogenesis, and what it holds, abiogenesis holds that for a certain window of time, there existed the necessary conditions for spontaneous generation to take place, for inanimate, lifeless matter to somehow come to life. And however, that those conditions only existed for a finite window of time, billions of years ago, and those conditions don't exist anymore. And that's why whenever they try to conduct experiments, which have been done going back to Louis Pasteur, trying to prove that inert, lifeless matter can come to life, they've done experiments for over 100 years, and the experiments always fail. And so it's led to the scientific axiom that only life can create life, that there has to be a first mover. Well, to get around this reality, proponents of the Big Bang Theory and Darwin's Origin of Species, they say that, there's this abiogenesis where those conditions necessary to create life out of lifeless matter, they did exist, but it was only during a specific window of time. That window is closed, and we can't do experiments to confirm it because those conditions don't exist anymore. And that's rather convenient. So you have to accept abiogenesis on blind faith. And but why believe in the Bible? Why just accept that there is a God, but we have Hinduism, Taoism, Shintoism, Buddhism. We've got all these different religions. What is so compelling about Christianity? They would say to me, and it's a fair argument, hey, Gordon, why are you a Christian? It's because you were brought up in a Christian country. You were brought up going to church. True. And so you're just naturally defaulting to, if you'd been born in India, you'd be a Hindu. If you'd been born in Southeast Asia, other parts of Southeast Asia, you'd be a Buddhist. If you'd been born in Mecca, you'd be a Muslim. And those are all fair comments. The reason I believe in I did walk away from the faith when I was 17, 18 years of age, and it was a conscious decision. I did not think I needed lordship over my life. I didn't think I needed God. And when it comes to the Bible, the key figure for me, kind of the Q figure, is Abraham. Of course, there's Adam and Eve, there's Noah, Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah. Abraham comes along much later. But for me, Abraham is somewhat the starting figure. And the reason for that is that it's from Abraham that I believe we get the stories of Adam and Eve, the stories of Cain and Abel, the stories of Noah, that they come from Abraham. Abraham, he lived in the city of Ur of the Chaldeans. He lived in Mesopotamia. And even mainstream atheistic archaeologists will say that Mesopotamia, Iraq, the fertile plain in between the Tigris and Euphrates River, that this is the cradle of civilization. And so that is from whence came Abraham. DM Andy is asking me a question. When you walked away from Christianity, did you still believe that God existed? I left at a similar age, but that was because I couldn't believe God could exist. Great question. It's hard to say. I mean, it's hard to put myself back into the shoes that I had when I was 17, 18. At that point, I used to tell people would say, "Are you a Christian?" I would say, "I am Christian." I would say, yeah, I still believed in God because I was still looking. I did a lot of investigation into alternative faiths. I got heavily into paganism because, I looked upon Christianity as being a Middle Eastern religion, and my ancestry, I'm English, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, so my ancestors would have been Druids or something along those lines. And so I started looking into things of that nature. And I also started to explore the idea of, so-called ancient aliens. I was always fascinated by the pyramids and how they came to be. You can't carbon date stone. And so when archaeologists give dates for the pyramids, it's based on the writings that they find on them, or engravings that they find around them. But the stone itself, I think it's highly probable in my mind that the pyramids were part of a pre-existent ancient civilization that even predates Abraham and Mesopotamia. And now I have the comments flying fast and furious. You see, when it comes to the question of God's existence, though, as I got deeper into it, and this happened more after I was 40, I started to look into thermodynamics, the laws regarding entropy, this idea that things go from high order to decay, things devolve, they don't evolve. And I started to realize that, I look at something as simple as a mosquito, and that little tiny aspect of creation is just mind-blowingly intricate and complex. And to think that it occurred by accident, and that similar accidents happened millions and billions of times over, starfish, seahorses, whales, you look at all the life forms that exist, and to think that all of these are just all examples of random accidents taking place, conceptually, I can't wrap my head around that idea. And I think it's helpful. I found my faith has grown exponentially since 2015, over the last 9-10 years, because I'm living in a very rural area in southeastern Ontario, Northumberland County, in a town of 10,000-12,000 people. Actually, I think we're 12-13 now. But if I lived in Toronto, which is where I used to live, reference I can't point there, CN Tower there. So I used to live in Toronto, and there, I would go out on a balcony, and my view is dominated by things that are created by human hands. Now, when I go out on my back deck here and I look out, I see the sky, I see the stars. We don't have the light pollution here. I look up into God's creation and I go, oh my God. And this is all just a random accident. This is all just chance. This was just a singularity exploding and then magically order coming out of chaos. I can't intellectually, I can't wrap my head around that idea. There has to be a first mover beyond the Big Bang. What existed outside of that singularity? And when they talk about the fact that the universe is expanding, they say the universe is expanding into what? And again, I draw that analogy from C.S. Lewis about Shakespeare and Hamlet. Likening God to Shakespeare and Hamlet to humanity. I got to read some of the comments. Arctic Bunkers, how do you explain 2 Kings, chapter 2, 23 and 24? Oh man. Judges. Samuel. Let's get to Kings. Here's First Kings, Second Kings. I'm not familiar at all with this passage. Chapter 2. I hope you wrote that down right. Second Kings 23 and 24. Let's see, 19, 23. Elisha at Jericho. Okay, so we're into the prophet Elisha. He went up from there to Bethel, and while he was going up on the way, some small boys came out of the city and jeered at him, saying, "Go up, you bald head." I have read this before. Look at my hair. That's why I put the hat on. Jeered at him, saying, "Go up, you bald head. Go up, you bald head." So repeating it. And he turned around, and when he saw them, he cursed them in the name of the Lord. And 2 she-bears came out of the woods and tore 42 of the boys. From there he went on to Mount Carmel, and thence he returned to Samaria. How do I explain it? What do you want explained? What issue do you have with this? There's a portion. There are some very problematic passages in the Bible. There's a section in Numbers where, I believe it's in Numbers, while Israel is in the wilderness, a man goes out on the Sabbath, on Saturday, gathering sticks, and he's brought before Moses and is stoned for having gathered sticks. There's another passage again while they're in the wilderness and they come up against a hostile nation and they go to war, and the Israelites, being led by Moses in the wilderness, defeat this opposing nation. And Moses comes up and with his leadership group, and they're incensed that their soldiers have let the women and children live. So why did you leave the women and children to live? Kill them all. But he says, if there's a girl that hasn't been with a man yet, well, you can take her as a concubine, but kill the rest. There's some very problematic things in the Bible that, looking at viewed through a modern eye, are disconcerting. But broadly speaking, when I look at Abraham, getting back to where I was going before, Abraham came out of Mesopotamia, and with him he brought the stories of the garden, of creation, of Adam and Eve, of Cain and Abel, of Noah, of the flood. And we also see that those stories remained in Mesopotamia as well, because we have similar accounts written in, I think it's cuneiform, on clay tablets. There's the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is very similar in many ways to the account of Noah's flood. The only thing is, so which version? Abraham's version, which was later passed on through an oral tradition, or what God eventually rendered onto these cuneiform clay tablets? Is that the more accurate? And the one aspect about the Epic of Gilgamesh is their description of the ark, or the boat that Gilgamesh built, was basically a square box. It would not have been seaworthy, whereas the rendering of how the ark was built in Genesis, they've done experiments, they've done modeling, and it would have been a seaworthy vessel. So DM Andy is saying, thanks. That makes a lot of sense. So there was a line for you to get back to accepting Christianity as the right religion. Yes, there was a line. I started to get much more deeply into my faith, started pouring into the Bible far more, started going back to church. My mother was dying of cancer. And at that point, a friend of mine who's a pastor, came back into my life. He used to be a neighbor, and he came back into my life. And at this time, I forget exactly how we met up or we bumped into each other. And he encouraged, with my mom dying of cancer, he gave me some amazing advice. One thing was, because it was a slowly progressing cancer, he said, "You're lucky you have time to say goodbye. Be sure to do it. Make sure to say goodbye. Don't leave it unsaid. Your mom is leaving." And my mom was very much. Now, my grandfather, my mom's dad, had been a pastor, so somewhat genetic as well. The Arctic Bunker is asking about the inconsistencies between Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I don't have an issue with calling them contradictions. Even a lot of Christians will be, the Bible does not contradict itself, and it depends on how you want to define contradiction. The example I often use is, if you look at the empty tomb. How many women went to the empty tomb? Was it Mary? Was it Mary and Salome? Was it Mary, Salome, and others? How many women went to the empty tomb? And Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John each have differing accounts. I think John, it's only Mary, and Luke, I think, is Mary and Salome. And there are different accounts in each. So which one was it? They contradict. How many women went to the empty tomb? Well, Mark says 3, and Matthew says 4, or an indeterminate number, and John says 1. So on that point, they contradict each other. However, the best description I can give of it is this: if an accident takes place, there's an intersection right in front of my house. If an accident were to take place between a red and a blue car, and there were individuals witnessing the accident, one standing on each corner, one maybe with the sun in their eyes, one with the sun at their back, and each are asked, which car entered the intersection first? Was it the red or the blue car? It is highly likely that you're going to get conflicting, contradictory reports about which car entered first, which car was the first to enter the intersection. Now, because each of the 4 accounts contradict each other on which car came in first, do you then say, well, the accident never took place because they can't agree which car entered the intersection first? No. The accident still took place. Any reasonable person is going to realize, well, there was obviously an accident. They all agree that there was an accident, and all 4 accounts agree that the tomb was empty. There's a dispute over how many women went. And I think we see this all in our own personal lives when, I'll be sitting down with my wife and explaining what happened when the 2 of us went to a party. And I'll say, well, we went to this party. We were driving. And then my wife will interject and she'll go, wait, before you say that, don't forget that we were supposed to first. Oh, right. I forgot that. We have 4 differing accounts. And they were written 20, 30 years after the actual events had taken place. Now, I look at Paul's writings. The Apostle Paul, he wrote most of the New Testament. And I look at a book like his book to the Roman Church. Paul, that book is widely held. It's basically accepted as fact now that Paul's letter to the Roman Church was written in around the year 50 to 55 AD. So 20 or so years after Jesus had gone to the cross, Paul was writing to the Roman Church. And Paul also had been conferring with Peter, who had, "You are my rock, and upon you I will build my ecclesia, I will build my public square." So these are firsthand contemporaries of Christ's earthly ministry, and of the risen Christ. And so we're not talking 20, 30 years after, we're talking about people who had firsthand knowledge. I'm going on way longer than I normally do in this video. So that, I hope that answered your question, Bunker, on the Arctic Bunker, on the inconsistencies between the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, between the different gospel accounts. On the important things, they agree. Minor details, what happened first, what happened after, doesn't mean that those things still took place. They disagree on minor details. Andy is saying, yep, I do think that. I think it's more possible than God. At the end of the day, I think, when we live in a world where God is thrown out, and I can understand, and I don't take exception to those who profess an atheistic worldview. But at the same time, when we look at, transgenderism, I think is the best example, and guys wanting to identify as women, well, in a godless world, there's logic to that. We have to accept that we're all gods unto ourselves, and whatever your subjective reality is, hey, fill your boots. Bob's your uncle. Do whatever you want, because, and where does that get us as a society? I think it gets us into the world that we're living in now. This is why I think we're seeing why the Western world is in decay. Arctic Bunker, I wanted to say Archie Bunker. The Arctic Bunker says there seems to be several morality issues with the passage. The biggest being the death penalty against children for what is essentially an insult. And that's fair enough. I'm trying to think of some brilliant theological counterpoint, but there, I've mentioned, Numbers, the guy being stoned to death for gathering sticks on the Sabbath. I've mentioned, I'm pretty sure it's in Numbers where, Moses takes exception to his army leaving women and children alive after a battle. The thing, ultimately, the way I look at it is that humanity, we're sinful creatures by nature, and our natural progress is toward death and destruction. And that God interjects himself into our story. Getting back to C.S. Lewis and Shakespeare and Hamlet, God wrote himself into our story and offers us a hand at salvation to rescue us from our natural course, our natural progression, that to which we are logically destined to go to, as happened to those kids with Elijah when they mocked him over being bald. They suffered, their natural end anyway. Simple fact of the matter is, this life is not the end. This life is, consciousness does continue. I state that as a matter of faith. I can't prove it, but for me, it's reality. This life is not the end. This existence that we have is not just the end of countless billions upon billions of random accidents. There is a design, and there's also two powers at force, two diametrically opposed powers. If there's good, there's evil. If there's hot, there has to be cold. If there's dry, there has to be wet. If there's good, there has to be evil. Arctic Bunker is saying the Muslims take that even a step further. Look up what the right hand passes in Islam. Okay, I'll have to look that up. I'm not overly familiar with Islam somewhat. I know the 5 pillars of Islam. And I have the name that gives me the biggest trouble. Thank you for coming on. Sharunian Allegiance. What are your thoughts on Moorish Science Temple? I don't know the Moorish Science Temple, so I don't have any thoughts on it yet. I'll read up on that. And DM Andy, I'm going to get ready for work, so can't stay. But I've enjoyed your chat. I just don't agree that we're in decay, though. I think society is better than at any time in history. Maybe discuss next time. I'll end it off. I was thinking a lot about this over the past few days. Born in 1966, and there's a great movie that came out in 1967. So when I was 1 year old, it was called Barefoot in the Park. It was based on a play written by Neil Simon. The movie version starred Robert Redford, Jane Fonda, and even Charles Boyer, an old Charles Boyer. And I just want to focus on one aspect of it. In the movie, Robert Redford's character and Jane Fonda, they're a newlywed couple, and they're going on their honeymoon. They have just been married. They pull up to the I think it's the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York in a horse-drawn buggy, and they're all over each other. Can't wait to get into their hotel room. And the way it's written, it's very plain that they have never engaged in sexual activity until now. They're about to go in, and the marriage is about to start. They're about to consummate the marriage. And that was, again, this movie was released in 1967, written by Neil Simon, probably, a few years before that. Stage play. Brilliant. It's very funny. But the thing is, there was a morality that existed that was positive for society. And it was a societal expectation. I'm not saying it was one that was always that it was always lived out, but there was an expectation, broadly speaking, in the Western world, in countries like Canada and the US, that men and women were to wait until they were married to engage in sexual activity. And this is a good thing. It brought about stable families. We look at the divorce rate now, we look at the drug use rate. When you break down the family unit, it had the repercussions spread out. And further, when I was growing up in the 1970s in New Jersey, a little town called Glen Rock, there was the Lutheran church, the Reformed church, the this church, the that church. Glen Rock is about the size of the town that I live in now, 10 to 15,000 people, small little town in New Jersey. And back then, 1970, 71, 72, when a new family would move into a neighborhood, if that family did not go to church, tongues would cluck. You see that family that just moved in down the road? They don't go to church. It was bad. Now, 40, 50 years later, everything's flipped up. And we've spun around 180 degrees. And now people will say a new family moves in. Oh, you see that family that moves in down the road? They go to church. And this is, in my mind, in my old antiquated graybeard mind, this is not a good thing. It does not bode well for society. The family unit is the bedrock of healthy, functioning society. It's never been perfect. There's always been abuse. There's always been alcoholism. There's always been substance abuse. These things have always existed. But now it's like we're embracing them. I'm going to finish off reading. I didn't know anything about the Moorish Science Temple. I'm going to check that out as soon as I finish here. I'm going to get ready for work, so I've read everything. Thank you very much for paying attention. This wasn't as good as I had wanted it to be. This idea, everything started with Abraham. For me, Abraham brought the stories out of Mesopotamia that we came to know from the book of Genesis about Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah. And further, it brought about prophecies that not just a burning bush, not just an angelic figure wrestling with Jacob on a mountain, but that eventually an anointed one who was there from the very beginning would come into the world, that the word would be made flesh, and that person is Jesus Christ. Anyway, God bless. We'll talk to you later. I'm going to stop rambling.